Women forced to generate consanguineous children in a sect of the Appalachians, the darkest cult of America. This is the story of one of the most disturbing discovered in recent American history. A case that remained hidden for almost 4 decades in the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains until it was revealed in 1975. In the autumn of 1975, police officer Raymond Holcomb was a trail through the dense forests of Appalachian in western Virginia, investigating reports of disappearances of young women in the region. The weather was changing. The gold and red leaves fell over the damp ground, while gray clouds blocked the sun. The ranger of Holcomb's boots over dried branches was the only sound beyond the sharp wind that blown between the trees. After 3 days of searching, Holcomb found a hidden clearing, invisible of the main paths. There, hidden between dense vegetation and natural rock formations, was a complex of rustic cabins, an isolated settlement completely disconnected from the outside world. Approaching with caution, the policeman noticed something disturbing. Children with evident physical characteristics of genetic problems played on the muddy ground. What caught my attention most was silence. The children did not speak, they just emitted incomprehensible sounds among themselves. Their faces had similar features, as if everyone were brothers. But there was something deeply wrong there, reported Holcomb in his official report. That would be the first contact in the outside world with the Shepherd community, an isolated sect founded in 1932 by Isaiah Shepherd, a former mining man who, after the Great Depression, took 12 families to the mountains with the promise of a new life, far from poverty and economic difficulties that plagued the country. What began as a refuge for desperate families has become over 4 decades into one of the most disturbing cases of isolation and systematic practice of consanguineous relationships already documented in the United States. In the weeks following the discovery, an investigation conducted by the Department of Social Services revealed the existence of 87 people living in the Shepherd community. Among them, 32 were children and adolescents with varying degrees of cognitive and physical impairment. Many had congenital malformations, such as cast fingers, deformed jaws, and severe vision problems. The discovered documentation on site, including a detailed diary maintained by leader Isaiah Shepherd, revealed something even more disturbing. The community had developed an elaborate marriage system arranged among close relatives, with the explicit goal of purifying the blood of the Shepherd lineage. We now understand that the Shepherd blood must remain pure, free from the impurities of the outside world. Each new generation forged within our own lineage brings us closer to the perfection we have been promised, Isaiah wrote at an entrance of 1956, when the community was already in its 2nd generation of consanguineous marriages. Subsequent studies indicated that, on average, children born in the Shepherd community shared more genetic material with each other than normal brothers would share in conventional families. Geographic and social isolation, combined with religious indoctrination, had created a closed system where the practice of consanguinity was not only accepted but actively encouraged. Dr. Elizabeth Marvers, a geneticist at the University of Virginia who studied the case, explained, "What we found in the Shepherd community was a perfect storm of geographical isolation, extreme poverty, and religious indoctrination, resulting in a dramatic increase in problematic recessive genes in the population. The physical and cognitive consequences for children born in that environment were devastating. One of the most shocking discoveries was the House of Mothers, a separate cabin where women of reproductive age were kept under strict vigilance. According to testimonials gathered, women were classified according to their line of lineage and assigned to specific partners by Isaiah Shepherd and, later, by his eldest son, Ezekiel. Rebecca Shepherd, one of the 24-year-old rescued women, reported, "Since childhood, they taught us that our sacred purpose was to generate children to the glory of the family. We sincerely believed that the outside world was condemned, and only the pure blood would survive to the time to come. Check it out if it is already subscribed to this channel. The truth about these secret communities needs to be revealed, and only we have the courage to show what society tries to hide. Subscribe now so as not to lose any of these stories that mainstream tries to silence." The year was 1932, and the United States faced the worst moment of the Great Depression. In a small miner village in Western Virginia, Isaiah Shepherd, then 41, was known for his apocalyptic sermons at community meetings. Former Minero and veteran of World War I, Isaiah had become a charismatic figure, mixing biblical passages with conspiracy theories about the imminent collapse of civilization. "The world as we know is dying," he preached. "Bankers and politicians have corrupted everything. Only the blood of blood will survive what is to come." The devastating economic conditions of the time created the perfect environment for their ideas to gain strength. Whole families had lost everything: jobs, houses, economies of a life. The despair was palpable, and Isaiah offered something precious: hope and a concrete plan. In March of that year, Isaiah brought together 12 families, approximately 67 people, and led them to a remote region in the Appalachian Mountains, about 40 kilometers from the nearest city. The area, which he claimed to have received in divine vision, was an abandoned property of more than 200 acres, with a natural source of water and lands that could be cultivated. Martha Jenkins, one of the few survivors of the original community who later left the group, described the early years. At first, it was about survival and independence. "We built cabanas, we planted gardens, we created animals. We worked on dawn at dusk, but there was a genuine feeling of community and purpose." Historical records confirm that. Initially, the Shepherd community functioned similarly to other groups seeking self-sufficiency during the Large Depression. They made semester trips to the nearest city to change animal skins and handicrafts for supplies they couldn't produce. The transformation of the community of an isolationist sect occurred gradually. Isaiah's diaries, recovered during the investigation, show a dramatic change in his thinking around 1938, when he began to develop what he called doctrine of blood purity. "I had a revelation last night," wrote in September 1938. "Our community was chosen to preserve the true human lineage. The outside world is contaminated, its genes corrupted by generations of impure mixtures. We must look inside, not out, to find our partners." This change coincided with two significant events: the death of Isaiah's wife, Sarah, during childbirth, and the beginning of World War II in Europe, which he interpreted as the beginning of the apocalypse he had predicted. From 1940, trips to the city became less frequent until they ceased completely in 1945. Isaiah implemented what she called lineage advice, a system where he, as a patriarch, determined who could marry whom within the community. The first arranged marriages involved high school cousins, a practice that, while increasing the risks of genetic problems, still maintained sufficient diversity in the genetic pool to avoid immediate severe problems. However, over generations and continuous isolation, the options became increasingly limited. The wedding system was based on what Isaiah called spiritual compatibility, but in practice meant that he completely controlled reproduction in the community, explained Dr. James Thornton, an anthropologist who extended the case. Over time, virtually everyone in the community became related to multiple kinship levels. In 1952, Isaiah formalized what would become the most disturbing aspect of the sect, the House of Mothers. All women of reproductive age were transferred to a central cabin, where they lived under the direct supervision of Martha Sheft, Isaiah's second wife. A recovered document entitled Laws of Purification explicitly outlined how women should be treated. Woman is the sacred vessel through which our lineage purifies itself. She does not belong to herself, but to the continuity of Shepherd blood. Women were subjected to regular examinations to determine their fertile and designated cycles to specific partners during these periods. Those who could not conceive after 3 years were relegated to service functions such as food preparation and care for younger children. Sarah Miller, a historian specializing in isolated communities from the Appalachians, notes, "What makes the Shepherd case particularly disturbing is how it transformed common cultural practices in the region: self-sufficiency, government distrust, strong family identity, into an oppressive system, justified by a pseudo-member ideology." With Isaiah's death in 1963 at the age of 72, the community's leadership passed to his eldest son, Ezekiel, then 38. Under their leadership, consanguineous practices became even more extreme. Remarks, including uncles and niece marriages, and even saints. An entrance to Ezekiel's diary, dated 1968, reveals the intensification of ideology. "My father began our purification, but it is up to me. Each generation must come closer to perfection until our blood becomes one and indivisible." The isolation of the community was reinforced by the introduction of severe punishments to any member who expressed desire for contact with the outside world. Survivor testimonials describe a system of purification that included periods of lone confinement and food deprivation. When the community was finally discovered in 1975, it was in its third generation of systematic consanguineous marriages, with devastating genetic consequences becoming increasingly evident. Hannah Shepherd was only 18 when police and social services arrived at the community. Unlike many children born in the settlement, Hannah had no visible physical deformities. But years of later psychological evaluation revealed the profound impact of isolation and indoctrination. "I was considered special because I was born without brands," Hannah explained in a statement recorded in 1982. "Ezekiel said that I was proof that we were on the right track, that purification was working. I believed in him completely." Hannah had been designated as Jacob's future wife, his father's half-brother and his first-degree cousin on the part of his mother. The marriage was scheduled to take place on its 10th birthday, just 3 months after the intervention of the authorities. The medical evaluations made in the 32 children and adolescents of the community revealed a disturbing pattern of conditions associated with consanguinity. Among the most common problems were cognitive deficits varying to severe to 27 of 32 children, facial malformations, including underdeveloped jaws and facial asymmetry in 19 children, fused fingers syndactylia in 8 children, congenital heart defects in 11 children, severe vision problems, including partial blindness in 14 children. Dr. Catherine Reynolds, a pediatrician who coordinated the initial evaluations, described, "What we saw was an abnormal concentration of rare genetic conditions. In such a small population, the likelihood of observing so many manifestations of problematic recessive genes would be practically zero without the presence of systematic consanguinity." One of the most alarming findings was the prevalence of Tay-Sachs disease among younger children, a condition usually associated with Assyrian Jewish populations and rarely seen in American rural communities. 5 children under 3 had signs of the disease, which is invariably fatal and results from the inheritance of recessive genes of both parents. The presence of Tay-Sachs in this population indicates that there was probably a bearer of the gene among the original founders of the community, explained Dr. Reynolds. In a normal population, the chance of 2 bearers meet and having children is extremely low. But with repeated consanguine marriages, the gene focused on the population until it emerges with devastating force. The psychological impact on community women was equally deep. Of the 23 women of reproductive age rescued, 18 had given birth at least once. Interviews conducted by psychologists revealed standards of complex trauma, including severe dissociation during traumatic events, fragmented identity, and difficulty making autonomous decisions. Deeply rooted belief systems on purity and contamination, paralyzing fear of the outside world, devastating guilt for participating in the system. Even as victims, Rebecca, one of the rescued women, shared, "The hardest thing was to realize that we loved our children desperately, but we brought them into the world in conditions that condemned them to suffering. How does a mother overcome it? If you are feeling revulsion and compassion at the same time, leave the phrase in the comments. No child deserves to be born condemned. Your voice is important for these stories to be known, and situations like these never again." For children born in the community, the transition to the outside world was especially traumatic. In addition to the medical challenges they faced, they had to adapt to a completely different world from what they knew. Dr. Michael Landry, a children's psychologist who worked with children shepherd for over a decade, explained, "These children not only faced physical and cognitive disabilities, but also a deep cultural maladjustment. They grew up believing that the outside world was malignant and that their community was the only safe place. The intervention, even though it was needed to save them, was experienced as an additional trauma." The recordings of the first sessions of therapy with the older children revealed a degree of indoctrination to which they were subjected. Many expressed fear of contamination by contact with strangers and demonstrative ritualized behaviors associated with purification. Samuel, one of the 16-year-old rescued teenagers, described in a recorded session, "We need to do the purification rituals every morning, or bad blood will master. If we don't, the brands will appear in our faces, and everyone will know that we are contaminated." In 1977, 2 years after the discovery of the Shepherd community, the University of Virginia established the Lineage Project, a multidisciplinary study dedicated to analyzing the genetic psychological and sociological effects of 4 decades of isolation and systematic consanguinity. Dr. Robert Harrington, a geneticist who led the scientific part of the project, explained the Shefford case offered a unique, though profoundly tragic opportunity to study the effects of consanguinity in an isolated human population over multiple generations. Collected data have been invaluable to our understanding of how deleterious recessive genes manifest in closed populations. The analysis of the community's genetic and genealogical records revealed an average coefficient of consanguinity of 0.16 in the last generation, an extremely high value, comparable only to that observed in some historically isolated communities around the world. To contextualize, the consanguinity coefficient for first-degree cousins is approximately 0.0625. What we saw in the Shefford community was a progressive and deliberate accumulation of consanguinity, explained Dr. Harrington, starting with marriages between second-degree cousins in the first generation, evolving to marriages between first-degree cousins in the second generation, and finally including unions between saints and uncles and nieces in the third generation. This deliberate escalation in genetic proximity resulted in a dramatic reduction in the genetic diversity of the population and the corresponding increase in the manifestation of rare recessive diseases. One of the most revealing aspects of the study was the analysis of specific genetic markers in community children. The researchers identified an abnormally high prevalence of homozygosis, the presence of 2 identical alleles in a specific genetic locus, indicating that many children had inherited identical copies of common ancestral genes. Dr. Margaret Wilson, a medical genetic expert who participated in the study, noted, in a normal population, an individual's chance of inheriting 2 identical alleles of a rare recessive gene is extremely low. But in the Shefford community, we saw multiple cases where it occurred, resulting in the manifestation of conditions that would normally have probabilities of 1 in dozens of thousands. One of the most significant findings was the identification of a specific genetic mutation that seemed to have originated with one of the founders of the community, a defect in chromosome 11 associated with a rare form of congenital heart disease. This mutation, rarely seen in the general population, was present in 37% of children tested. What we are observing is the so-called founding effect combined with the bottleneck effect, explained Dr. Wilson. A rare mutation that was present in one of the founders became common in the population due to reproductive isolation and repeated consanguine marriages. In addition to physical manifestations, the study also extensively documented the cognitive and neurological effects of prolonged consanguinity. Key tests performed on children revealed a significantly diverted distribution from the population, with an average of 23 points below expected for children of the same age group. The observed cognitive impact cannot be attributed only to social isolation or lack of educational stimulation, concluded Dr. Harrington. The observed patterns are consistent with the known effects of endogamy depression, the reduction in biological aptitude resulting from reproduction between genetically related individuals. A particularly disturbing aspect of the study was the documentation of how the Shefford, a community, had developed a belief system elaborated to rationalize and even celebrate the physical manifestations of consanguinity. Documents recovered from the community revealed that children born with obvious malformations were often described as having sacred marks, visible signs of their lineage. Those who had severe cognitive problems were seen as blessed with eternal innocence. Dr. Susan Reynolds, a cultural anthropologist who analyzed the community's belief system, noted, "What we see here is a classic example of how ideologies can evolve to justify harmful practices. The community has developed a complex mythology that transformed evidence of genetic damage into high spiritual status signs." The ethical and legal implications of the Shefford case raised difficult issues for the authorities and professionals involved. Although community practices were clearly harmful to children, many adults argued that they were sincerely following their religious beliefs and had no intention of harm. The Lineage Project also documented the process of adapting children and women rescued to the outside world, revealing complex trauma, resilience and recovery patterns that reported future protocols for interventions in isolated communities. 50 years after the discovery of the Shefford community, his legacy continues to reverberate in the fields of genetics, psychology, law, and ethics. The case, considered one of the most extensively documented examples of systematized consanguinity in modern history, has become an essential case study for professionals of multiple disciplines. For survivors, the recovery path was long and complex. Of the 87 people rescued in 1975, 23 have already passed away, many due to health complications related to genetic conditions. Younger children, now adults in 50 years, continue to face significant challenges. Emily Shefford, who was only 3 years old when the community was discovered, shared her journey in a documentary produced in 2015. "I grew up between two worlds, the world we left behind in the mountains and the outside world that never fully understood who we were. Most people see me just as a victim, but our story is more complex than that." Despite the severe physical deformities with which he was born, including a rare condition that merged his fingers and severely limited his mobility, Emily was able to obtain a university degree and became an advocate of the rights of people with disabilities of genetic origin. "What happened in the Shefford community was tragically wrong," she said. "But reducing people who were born there to mere victims or medical curiosities is another form of dehumanization. We are complete individuals, not just manifestations of troubled genes." The Shefford case also caused significant changes in public policies related to isolated communities and interventions in religious groups. The Shefford Protocol, developed in 1982 as a direct result of the case, established guidelines for how authorities should address similar situations, emphasizing the need to balance respect for religious autonomy with the protection of children's fundamental rights. Helen Roberts, a child protection policies expert who helped develop the protocol, explained, "Before the Shefford case, there was a significant reluctance on the part of the authorities to intervene in isolated religious communities. The case has established an important precedent, reaffirming that practices that cause objective damage to children cannot be protected under the guard of religious freedom." In the field of medical genetics, samples and data collected from the Shefford community continue to provide valuable insights. The Shefford Genetic Bank, maintained by the University of Virginia under rigorous ethical protocols, contains anonymous genetic information that helped researchers identify genes associated with rare conditions and develop tests to detect potentially problematic mutations. Dr. Jonathan Chun, a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University who used bank data for rare recessive disease research, noted the tragedy of the shepherd community continues to contribute to advances that can potentially prevent similar suffering in the future. It is a powerful example of how we can learn from past errors. For local Appalachian communities, the shepherd case remains a sensitive theme. Many descendants of original community members who did not follow Isaiah to the mountains still live in the region and faced stigmatization due to the association with the name shepherd. John Matthews, local historian and author of Shadows in Appalachian, The True History of the Shepherd Community, said, "There is a tendency to treat the case as a freak, something completely disconnected from regional culture and history. But the truth is that the shepherd community has emerged from real conditions, the extreme poverty of Great Depression, the geographical isolation of the Appalachians, traditions of self-confidence and distrust of outsiders. Ignoring this context prevents us from recognizing as similar communities could form again." In 2005, a small memorial was established on the land where the community previously existed, now part of a nature reserve. A simple bronze plate can't. These are the names of the 23 children and adults who died due to complications related to consanguinity, with the inscription, "In memory of those whose lives have been shortened by false beliefs. May their history teach us the value of diversity and human connection." The case also continues to inform contemporary debates on the limits of religious freedom, children's rights, and state responsibilities. Jurists and ethicists often cite the shepherd case in discussions about when and how authorities should intervene in cultural or religious practices that may cause damage. Richard Dawson, a professor of medical ethics at Georgetown University, noted, "The shepherd case forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable issues about autonomy, consent, and protection. In a society that values religious freedom and the right of communities to live according to their own beliefs, where do we draw the line when these practices cause demonstrable damage?" For medical professionals, the case also highlights the importance of genetic counseling and education about the risks of consanguinity. Dr. Emily Carter, a genetic counseling expert at Mayo Clinic, explained, "We use the shepherd case as a case study in our training programs, not only to illustrate the biological risks of prolonged consanguinity, but also to raise awareness of how to approach this topic in a culturally sensitive and non-stigmatizing way." Check it out if you are already subscribed to this channel, so as not to lose more stories like this. Leave a comment saying "I watched here," so I can meet you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Like this video and share with someone you believe you should know this impressive story. No child deserves to be born condemned, and only through education and awareness can we prevent tragedies like it from recurring.